And so what we see with Abraham and Sarah, and then with Isaac and Rebekah, and then Jacob and Rebekah, or Rachel, we see these sagas, these stories that become stories of perseverance, of redemption, of God preserving and being sovereign for all the people of His people, of this family that He called out. Now Abraham and Sarah are called to Palestine. They travel here. They are monotheistic. That makes Abraham different from almost everyone else around him. In fact, we're not sure that there was anyone else that was monotheistic. And what we see is that Abraham began to call the name of the Lord, which is Yahweh, later revealed as Yahweh, to him. And he goes here to be blessed and is to have descendants. Now this is interesting because Abraham and Sarah are older, and as they come to this land, it doesn't seem like they could have any descendants, and this leads to a issue later on for the two. What happens is that they go into Egypt because of a famine. Sarah is taken in by Pharaoh because she was a beautiful woman, and when Pharaoh finds out, he kicks Abraham and Sarah out, and in order to sort of pay his debt for what he had done, Pharaoh gives them a handmaiden by the name of Hagar. Now Hagar becomes the mother of Ishmael. Ishmael is the father of the Arab people, and Ishmael is considered the promised son for the Jewish people, and for Christianity it is Isaac that is the promised son. So we see that they are tested, but God is always faithful to them. Now Abraham dies. Isaac becomes, this saga of Isaac and Rebekah becomes important. Isaac was a mama's boy. If you read the story, you will find Ishmael and his father had a great love for one another. Ishmael was a strong, strapping young man. Isaac was a bit of a mama's boy. And when his mother died, he started wanting another mama. And so he marries Rebekah, who is a very strong-willed, very determined woman. They have two sons, Esau and Jacob, and she wants Jacob to be the one who fulfills the blessing or the covenant. And so what we see is that Jacob deceives his father Ishmael. He then has to flee because his brother Esau is going to kill him. He goes out. He meets up with his cousins. He goes to live with his mother's brother, Laban, and there he meets his cousins, falls in love with one of them, and we know the story of how he is fooled on his wedding night, and he is married to Leah. Leah is the sad-eyed girl. Now the story takes a twist here that's quite often missed, because even though he loved Rachel, pronounced correctly it's Rachel, though he loves her, she is not the one that gives the children of the promise. It is Leah that actually produces the children of the promise. We'll see how that works out in a few moments. And so Jacob goes back. He expects Esau to kill him. Esau instead reconciles with his brother and loves him, and Jacob comes to live there. Rachel dies, but Jacob and Leah and the handmaidens, they have 12 sons, some daughters, but you don't count daughters during this time, just your sons. 12 sons. And again, the story takes a very interesting twist here. Out of the 12 sons, the two that are most remembered is Benjamin and Joseph, because Joseph was the dreamer. He was the one with the beautiful coat. By the way, coat of many colors in Hebrew actually signifies a coat that has sleeves in it. Imagine that. And so Joseph is taken into captivity, goes to Egypt, and there he rises to the third place. Now, here there is some bearing on history and archaeology here. There were a group of people called the Hyksos. They were Hebrew people. They were Semitic people who moved over to Egypt and eventually took power there. Some people believe this was when Jacob and his family also followed the Hyksos into Egypt during this time. The Hyksos rose to power, and Joseph was there, it is thought, during this time. And that's interesting because if you ever wondered how could a poor Hebrew boy rise to the third place in Egyptian power, this is how he did it. He did it because the right people were there. Some cousins were there in charge, and Joseph rose. Now we think of Joseph as, some people even remark that Joseph is a patriarch. But actually Joseph is not the most important person in the story at this time. He is a person that points to God's redemption and His sovereignty, how God saved His people, even during a great famine. But what we see is another one of the brothers, quite often forgotten, is the one that is really the story here, really the focal point of the story, and that is Judah. Because it is Judah that carries the lineage on. And Judah has two sons through his daughter-in-law. It's a very complicated story, but her husband died. She did not have any children. It was the responsibility of Judah and the other sons to give her a son. They did not do it, so she fools Judah by posing to be a prostitute. When he finds out what takes place, he's ashamed. She has two sons, and those sons carry on the lineage of Judah, or the kingship that would later become David. That's why Judah is so important. And the story is really about how God preserved Judah and the family up to this point. So we see this as a part of redemptive history that carries this little clan, this little family of nobodies, barely hanging on, barely surviving, but God protects them. And they will rise to become a great people in Egypt, and then they're put into captivity. This is how the story goes. So it's very interesting to see how the patriarchs play into this. Now, Abraham is really the central figure of Judaism. He is the important person. Later, as Judaism gets away from the temple, builds the temple, Moses becomes important. And Moses, the lawgiver, becomes the most important. In the time of Jesus, Moses is seen as the central figure of Judaism. And in New Testament, we see that Paul takes Judaism back to Abraham and back to the statement that he was made righteous by his faith. Okay? So this is the continuation of the story of the patriarchs. In the first 11 chapters is the primeval, and then the story of the patriarchs. Wonderful stories, and some verification through history and through secondary sources, archaeology, that these things may very well have taken place. So I hope you enjoyed this. This is sort of a skeleton lecture for you. Some of you may know the stories. If you don't, go back and read the book of Genesis and become familiar with it. It's a fascinating story about humankind, their fall from utopia, their fall from grace, and then their descent and climb back through that to once again find favor with God through God's grace.